Between 1813 and 1818, there was significant developments in the field of newspaper publication. The first Indian newspaper published by Gangadhar Bhattacharjee, the Bengal Gazette, appeared on the scene. However, it lived only for 1 year. In 1818, John Burton and John Mackenzie secured permission to publish a newspaper, The Guardian. Permission was also granted to publish the paper on Sunday after an assurance had been given that the work of the press will be completed on Saturday night. The Serampore missionaries started 3 journals. 1. The Digdarshan, a monthly magazine. 2. The Samachar Darpan, a weekly Bengali newspaper. 3. Friend of India, a monthly periodical published in English. 2 years later, a quarterly of the same name, that is Friend of India, was published. However, both these journals ceased publication in 1827 owing to financial difficulties. Interestingly, the Samachar Darpan continued publication till 1840. It carried vast information from 60 zillas of Bengal. The Marquess of Hastings allowed the Darpan concession of paying only 1/4 of the usual amount of postage, and his successor, Lord Amherst, subscribed for 100 copies which were distributed to government offices. It was widely patronized by the leading functionaries of the government. The civilians subscribed to it for the valuable information it carried about their districts. This information could not be obtained through official channels. Indians who contributed to the journal did so because of its official circulation. Soon after, William Butterworth Bailey took over as the press censor. Immediately, Bailey came into conflict with Heatley, the proprietor editor of Morning Post, a Calcutta newspaper. Bailey wished to exclude certain passages in an article submitted to him for pre-censorship. Heatley refused to comply. It was then that Lord Hastings decided to abolish press censorship altogether and thrust the responsibility on the editors themselves for excluding matters that were likely to affect the government or was injurious to public interest. The rules that followed were: the editors of newspapers were prohibited from publishing any matter coming under the following heads. 1. Any adverse versions on measures and proceedings of the Honourable Court of Directors or other public authorities in England connected with the Government of India. 2. Disquisitions on political transactions of the local administration. 3. Any offensive remarks levelled at the public, conduct of the members of council, of the judges of the Supreme Court or of the Lord Bishop of Calcutta. Any discussions having a tendency to create alarm and suspicion among the native population or any intended interference with their religious opinions. Republication of passages under any of the above categories from English or other newspapers. In other words, any publication that affected the British power or reputation in India. It was at about this time that 2 dominating personalities made their appearance on the newspaper scene. 1. James Silk Buckingham, a vigorous, dominating and relentless personality, and 2. Raja Ram Mohan Roy, a patient, persistent and polite personality. Both of them were dominating figures and men of vision. They played a significant role in the fight for the freedom of the press. They attracted large number of supporters from among their countrymen. James Silk Buckingham attracted attention when, as a commander of a vessel, he detained ships carrying slaves from the coast of Madagascar. He surrendered his command in protest. This commendable action earned recognition for him as a man of principles in the eyes of all in Calcutta, including the Governor General and the Bishop. His newspaper, Calcutta Journal, with 8 pages, was published twice a week. The paper described the editor's functions as being to admonish governors of their duties, to warn them fearlessly of their faults and tell disagreeable truths. The correspondence columns were open to all who had a grievance and threw the existing papers in Calcutta into utter confusion and chaos. Buckingham edited his paper fearlessly till 1823 when he was deported. While in England, he started another paper, the Oriental Herald, in which he pursued the exposure of the administration in India. Through his writings and tireless campaigns against the restrictions and censorship imposed on the press, Buckingham convinced many Indian minds in England and India. He stressed on the useful function which a free press could perform by its exposure of lapses in the administration and criticism of government policies. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was essentially a social and religious reformer. At an early age of 14, he developed a passion for truth. He was a brilliant conversationalist, patient in debates and persuasive rather than controversial in the many of the books that he published. The weeklies and dailies of that time gladly accepted his contributions. He made his entry into journalism through the Brahmanical magazine published in English, the Samvad Comedy in Bengali and the Miratul Akhbar in Persian. His conception of freedom of the press was freedom to pursue the truth, and his representation was that it was the duty of the ruler to preserve it at all costs and at all times. Two important causes that Raja Ram Mohan Roy is known for are his agitation for the abolition of sati and secondly his struggle for Hinduism against the onslaught of Christian missionaries of Serampore. Raja Ram Mohan Roy's papers and generally the progress Indian press were viewed with the same apprehension in official circles. Newspapers which favoured the orthodox point of view did not attract the same measure of hostile attention. The Miratul Akhbar was restrained in its language and constructive in its criticism. It dealt with the social and administrative evils and critically examined British policy both in India and England. James Silk Buckingham was a close friend of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Both of them took up the struggle for the freedom of the press and have left a significant mark on the history of journalism in India. Some of the significant developments of this period were: 1. Liberal concessions were allowed to the papers published by the Serampore missionaries. Only nominal concession was given to the Indian-owned Indian language newspapers, and that too on application. The first press ordinance issued in 1823 by Governor General John Adams prohibited the printing of books and papers without a license. It also provided a penalty for infringement of a fine of rupees 1000 commutable to imprisonment. It was obvious that the regulations introduced by John Adams were directed against newspapers published in Indian languages and edited by natives in India. The Miratul Akhbar figured prominently in the case made out for the ordinance. Ram Mohan Roy closed the Mirat and severed connections with the Samvad Comedy. The Indian-owned newspapers kept clear of political topics for 7 years following the press regulations. Lord Bentinck's assumption of the Governor-Generalship was marked by a significant change in the attitude of the government towards the press in India and the language press in particular. In 1830, a number of language newspapers and periodicals came into existence. His regime was marked by a liberal attitude towards the press, which was greatly influenced by Sir Charles Metcalfe. Sir Charles Metcalfe favoured regulation of the press. He invited Macaulay, the legislative member of the Supreme Council, to draft a Press Act. This act intended to establish perfect uniformity in the laws regarding the press throughout the Indian Empire. In 1836, Maulvi Muhammad Bakar started Delhi Urdu Akhbar. After that, a large number of Urdu newspapers emerged corner to corner of the subcontinent. Some significant factors behind the progress of Urdu journalism were that In 1830, the East India Company declared Urdu the official language of government institutions and court of law. So, the importance of Urdu increased fourfold. After 1835, many newspapers of regional languages came on the front line. Among them, Urdu language newspapers were the most important because Urdu was the official language. In 1836, lithotype printing was started. It was very attractive and inexpensive, so the cost of newspapers could be reduced. Consequently, it became easier to start an Urdu newspaper. The government intended to promote Western studies in the subcontinent. Since Urdu newspapers were appropriate medium for the purpose, the government used to purchase a certain quantity of newspapers for offices, schools and colleges. This setup financially supported some of the newspapers. These were the four elements behind the growth and progress of Urdu journalism in the subcontinent. Later, many new Urdu papers started in Delhi and all over the subcontinent, especially Delhi and Lahore. More than a dozen newspapers and periodicals started in Delhi. Comparatively, two were most significant and had a profound effect on the Muslim society. First, Delhi Urdu Akhbar, and second was Sayyid ul Akbar. The 1857 war gave a great boost to the press and a large number of Urdu papers and journals made their debut. Notable among these were the Sadiqul Akhbar and Delhi Urdu Akhbar. During the 1857 mutiny, Delhi Urdu Akhbar played a significant role along with the Delhi Gazette. Delhi Urdu Akhbar continued for 21 years. Maulvi Muhammad Bakar was its first editor. Later on, his son Maulana Muhammad Hussain Azad took the responsibility. After 1857, Urdu journalism entered a new era of development. Mention may be made of some major papers like the Awadh Akhbar Lucknow, the Awadh Punch Lucknow, the Tehzeeb ul Akhlaq Aligarh, which was started by prominent Muslim reformer Sir Syed to reform the Muslims of India. The Vernacular Press Act was comprehensive and rigorous. It empowered any magistrate to call upon the printer and the publisher of the newspaper to enter into a bond undertaking not to publish certain kind of material. Also, no printer or publisher could have recourse to a court of law. At the time of the passing of the Vernacular Press Act, the Indian language press of Madras was very feeble. There were no Indian owned newspaper published in English, and there was no association to give expression to the feelings of the people. At this time, Veera Raghvachari and G. Subramanya Iyer gave birth to the Hindu. The act was repealed in 1882. The vernacular press grew rapidly after this act was repealed. Newspapers were published in Persian, Urdu and Hindi. Simultaneously, there was a rise in the growth of the English newspapers in Assamese, Bengali, Gujarati, Malayalam, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, Oriya and Punjabi. (1896) was a significant year for Indian communication system as it witnessed the arrival of cinema in India. The first name that springs up in the history of cinema, that of the Lumiere brothers, who introduced the art of cinema to the subcontinent with their 6 short films. The success of these films led to the screening of more foreign films till 1897. 1897, Harishchandra Sakharam Bhatavdekar, popularly known as Save Dada, made short films. Later, Dadasaheb Phalke took Indian cinema to new heights. His path-breaking film Raja Harishchandra was released in 1913. The subject of these silent films was mythological. For For the next several years, rapid growth of Indian cinema led to the end of silent era and ushered to the era of talkies. The first talkie film was Alam Ara, directed by Ardashir Irani in 1931.
ए लड़की, क्या गा रही हो? राग गाओ राग.
क्या कहा? क्या कहा तुमने?
In 1924, broadcasting begins in India with the formation of a private radio service in Madras. In the very same year, Indian Broadcasting Company started 2 radio stations in Bombay and Calcutta. In 1930, when this company went bankrupt, colonial government took away its transmitters and started Indian State Broadcasting Corporation. This very corporation was renamed All India Radio in 1936. After independence, AIR was made a separate department under the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. Round the bend of the century, a number of newspapers and periodicals came into existence. Rabindranath Tagore started the Sadhana and G.A. Natesan founded the Indian Review. Outside India, Gandhi took over the editorship of the Indian Opinion in South Africa. Gandhi exerted a powerful influence on the editors of the newspapers. He asked them to fearlessly express their views without necessarily supporting the views or policies of the Congress. The Indian press, under the influence of Gandhi, acted in a fearless manner to represent the cause of Quit India in 1942. The third and the fourth decades of the 20th century saw the establishment and growth of a number of newspapers despite the stringent press regulations in force during the period. The Hindustan Times, the Statesman, the Free Press Journal, the Indian Express, the Times of India made their appearance. Besides these, Amrita Bazar Patrika and the Anand Bazar Patrika group published a number of newspapers and were published from more than one place. Mahadev, Gobind Ranade and Bal Gangadhar Tilak entered the social reform movement. They laid emphasis on the fact that the social reforms should pave the way for political freedom. The Kesari and the Maharatha were the 2 newspapers that were inspired by this philosophy. These papers advocated both the social and the political cause. Tilak wielded a powerful pen and he made the people understand how to criticize the bureaucracy boldly. Another reformer, G.K. Gokhale, took up the cause on special representation of minorities. Gokhale's view was that in the best interest of their public life and for the future of their land, Indians must first have elections on territorial basis in which all communities without distinction of race or creed should participate. He laid down the conditions for constitutional agitation. Gandhiji was the president of the All India Home Rule League when he laid his plans for the first comprehensive countrywide non-cooperation movement. He called for surrender of titles, boycott of official functions, schools, colleges and courts, as well as elections to the reformed councils and foreign goods. The martial law excesses in Punjab in 1919 were first brought to light in the columns of the Bombay Chronicle. Benjamin Guy Horniman, the editor of Bombay Chronicle and an enthusiastic supporter of the Indian cause, wrote on the massacre of the Jallianwala Bagh tragedy and was deported to England. The Bengali newspapers fared a lot better during the Gandhian period. The credit for this goes to Motilal Ghosh, who fought for the national cause with hostile criticism in the Amrit Bazar Patrika. On October 25, 1940, the Government of India issued an order which prohibited the printing or publishing by any publisher, printer, editor in British India any matter directly or indirectly to foment opposition to the prosecution of the war. The order was withdrawn 17 days later following discussions in Delhi between the government and the representatives of leading newspapers. Soon after Gandhi's arrest in 1942, in view of the statement that it was better not to publish newspapers than to bring them under all kinds of government restrictions, several newspapers like the National Herald, the Indian Express and Dinamani suspended publication. Gandhi devoted the next 5 years to an all-out effort to bring all elements together behind the combined effort for freedom irrespective of communal or political differences, and this effort resulted in freedom for India in 1947. The mass media were at a nascent stage of development in India, particularly during the struggle for freedom. Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru communicated with the masses through mass meetings rather than contact on individual basis. The freedom struggle also utilized the well-known traditional art forms like Burakatha, ballads, Ogukatha in the Telugu-speaking areas, Yakshagana of Karnataka, Nautanki of Maharashtra, Jatra of Bengal and other similar traditional art forms peculiar to different regions in the country. This yielded impressive results and achieved the purpose it was intended. Thus, communication through the press, through traditional forms and mass meetings helped India in its freedom struggle. Today, India has progressed to a platform where it leads in the field of communication technology. The success of this achievement has been the contribution and committed effort of all the dynamic leaders of the period. These were some of the highlights of the early communication system in India. To sum up, briefly, we have traced the beginnings of written communication to the growth and role of the print media in the freedom struggle. In the next episode, we shall be right back here to discuss the history of newspapers and magazines in India. I hope everyone has enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.